Welcome back, our dear viewers. As we promised earlier, we are going to talk today about the visit by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to New York. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi returned to Egypt after wrapping up his visit to New York, where he attended the meetings of the 70th session of the UN General Assembly. He delivered several speeches there. He conducted several views and media meetings, and also he met with several world leaders and figures on the sidelines of his visit and participation at the meeting of the UN General Assembly. To shed more light on that visit and its importance on both the political and economic levels, we are very much delighted to have our very dear guest, Mr. Mohamed Sheta, the media expert. Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you, too. Good morning, and good morning to your viewers, of course.
Good morning, Mr. Sheta. First, I would like you to tell us how did you read the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's speech before the 70th session of the UN General Assembly?
Well, I think it was a very important speech in which he talked about several very important points regarding the peace process in the Middle East, as well as the current situation in other countries like Libya and Iraq, for example, and Syria, of course. He started his speech by denouncing the Islamic extremists who definitely are misleading lots of people, not only in Egypt but all over the Middle East region, and their extremist messages. The point is when maybe lots of the decision makers and lots of the states and the head of states of the different countries, they are not really aware about what's going on in Egypt and the Middle East region. So I think it was a very good opportunity that he spoke himself and spoke directly to the people, which as a matter of fact reflected afterwards in his meetings, his personal meetings with several presidents and prime ministers.
Mr. Sheta, from your point of view, to what extent this visit by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to attend the 70th session of the UN General Assembly, as well as his meetings on the sidelines of that summit or that session of the UN, was important on the economic front?
Well, I think it's very important because the more stable Egypt is, and the more stable the picture of Egypt, which is transferred to the Western world, the better it is for our economy, because it is very important to attract foreign investors, and foreign investors are very afraid of regions which are not stable, because they want, first of all, they want to have a stable country with stable and reliable laws. So, for example, if they go invest in a country where there is no political stability, where there is no economic stability, then it does make sense for them to invest. So first of all, we need to have a real state, a functioning state, where people can go buy the products of these investors, because if you don't have a stable security and a stable country, people will not consume lots of products, and they will start saving their money and keep it at home just for the sake of the times which they might face.
But to what extent the visit by the President to the UN General Assembly, his meetings, did help in delivering that image or that message to the whole world that we are a stable country, we are moving forward, and we want investors, we want a better economy, which will be beneficial for both sides?
It delivered it in an indirect way, because most of the meetings of President al-Sisi was with political figures, with presidents, with the prime ministers, but nevertheless the message which is broadcasted and transferred through the different media also gets to the financial and economic decision makers of the huge.
Actually, one of the most important meetings he held was his meeting with the World Bank president, in which President Fattah al-Sisi emphasized on the economic reforms carried out by Egypt, and said that these reforms reflected Egypt's insistence to achieve an all-out economic development. So, in your opinion, how can the World Bank contribute to these economic reforms here in Egypt?
Actually, the more support we get from the World Bank, of course, is the better. But nevertheless, we should not rely on the World Bank. I think it's better to rely on direct investors, on direct investments from not from countries necessarily or from the funds of the different countries, but more from the private sector, because actually the private sector is the most productive sector anywhere in the world. So I just read in the news today that one of the biggest electric and energy companies, Schneider, is opening something in Sharm el-Sheikh today, and the CEO of the company met with the Prime Minister a couple of days ago in Cairo. So this is one of the many positive aspects which after the economic conference back earlier this year. And of course, the opening of the Suez Canal and the development of the Suez Canal corridor will definitely help in attracting more investors from the different sectors. For example, the automotive sector, I remember that there were several delegations from Russia, from Europe, from the United States who came and visited Egypt during the past couple of months. And they had meetings, for example, with the former Prime Minister Ibrahim Mahleb to discuss opening new facilities in Cairo, even some facilities in Asyut as well. A Japanese car company was planning to open, to build an assembly factory in Asyut. And of course, there's also huge interest in investing in the Suez Canal corridor by the automotive companies. So the more diverse the sectors are which we can attract to Egypt, of course, the better. But what we need to rely on is to produce high quality products and not rely on low budget products. Low budget products will only be for the consumers inside Egypt, but we need to export. We need to rely more on the export. For example, Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, and almost they are almost 50% of their economy relies on the export, and this is why they're so strong. So I hope that we can start and really push the Egyptian investors and the foreign investors to produce high-quality products made in Egypt.
Actually, President Fattah Sisi met with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel on the sidelines of the General Assembly meetings, and he emphasized the important role of German companies and how they play a major role in Egypt's development.
Yes, we have a very active German chamber here in Egypt, and of course the German companies. There are several German automotive companies who had their factories here in Egypt, and we have lots of other in the tourism sector, for example. We have lots of German companies as well, and in many sectors actually. What was more important, I suppose, in the meeting with Angela Merkel was the migrant crisis, which is currently hitting Europe very hard, and especially Germany. And Germany is actually playing a very role in hosting most of the Syrian refugees, and this is actually something which is very, very respectful for what they did, because so far Germany is the only country which is really welcoming refugees with the open arms, and nobody was expecting this actually. So and I hope that all the other European countries would follow Germany.
Unfortunately, it's not the case, and we have seen that during also the meetings of the president and beforehand the meetings of the foreign ministers of these countries to tackle the refugee crisis.
Yes, the problem is that some countries, especially Hungary, for example, and Croatia, they're very, very uncomfortable with the refugees and the migrant situation. And I can understand why they're so aggressive. Even besides the political decision makers, even the...
we have seen these footages of the refugees being treated in not a very proper way by the police there.
Yes, there was even, it was not only the police. I mean, there was this Hungarian female journalist which actually hit a Syrian father while he was... she kicked his leg or something while he was running away from the police and carrying his son, and but this story has a very positive end at the end. I don't know if you heard about it. Cristiano Ronaldo, the famous football player, he invited his son, this little son, to come and play with him and join him at the stadium. So. Of course, this picture went around the world, and everyone was talking about this picture. How unfriendly the people and how brutal people can be. And she was just a journalist covering the events, and then she saw this this father running, and then she kicked him, you know. So it was not even her role. She's not a policewoman or anything, you know. So it's a very tragic situation, actually. And I'm sure that lots of the presidents and heads of state, they definitely President Sisi about how to solve the crisis in Syria, because now, as you surely followed during the past couple of days, now there is a new strategy regarding Syria, because obviously, and this was also tackled for the first time by Angela Merkel, that they should take into consideration that President Bashar al-Assad should be in the transition phase in order to fight ISIS on one hand, and on the other hand, in order to control the huge number of migrants and refugees from Syria, because this is something which is really disturbing and creating problems, also financial problems for the European countries, especially for Germany. I mean, Germany has been very, very welcoming so far, but nevertheless, they cannot take more than they can't take millions and millions of refugees. You know, this costs lots of money. There's a problem in providing the accommodation for all these huge numbers. We've already seen some problems between, for example, some Afghan refugees and some Syrian refugees, where they had some fights in some refugee camps. You know, the separation between now the German police is considering separation, for example, between the men and women in these camps, for example, in order to minimize the violence between the refugees themselves. So there are a lot of problems that need to be solved.
Quite a complicated issue.
Exactly, and I think President Sisi, definitely, they listened to him very carefully, what he had to say, because Egypt is so far the only country in the Middle East which was able to pass the so-called Arab Spring with really minimal damages. Yes, exactly.
Actually, the President also emphasized during his speech on the role that can be played by youth, and how should we invest in young people as a tool for development in the coming period. So how do you see this?
I think this is a very important message which President Sisi gave to the Egyptian youth, especially because during the past couple of weeks, we saw the initiative of President Sisi of training 2,500 Egyptian youth for getting into the political field and getting into decision-making positions inside the government. So this is something very important. We used to have a center or an academy for such calibers, which unfortunately during the past couple of decades obviously was not very successful. So now it's the time to really get some new and fresh blood and show them how it can be done correctly. One of the things which was discussed during the interview of President Sisi with the PBS, the TV channel in the United States, the journalist told him that that Egypt is starting to ban demonstrations. This is the picture which the Western media has from Egypt, which is of course a misleading picture. And he told, no, we're not planning to ban demonstrations, but we want to have a certain a certain way of certain rules for demonstration, like
which is the case in
every country. In every country, you can't just go wake up this morning, call a couple of friends, and then go make a demonstration anywhere. No, you need to get the permission. And then you get some security, and you get some police, some police forces to secure the demonstration. You know, so he explained, and this is a very important point. And he told her, we are not in the position, Egypt is not in the financial position of having ongoing demonstration 24/7. You know, we are in a phase where we're trying to build the country. We need to focus on building the country. We need to be productive. So we want
to. And the country in the world, sorry for interruption, Mr. Sheta, is having demonstrations all the time.
Of course, of course. This would bring you nowhere. So I think he wanted to make this point clear, that we're trying to to direct the youth on the correct path, so we don't fall into the dilemma which we had in the dilemma and the chaos which we had in Libya, for example. So I think this was also one of the very important points which President Sisi made clear during this interview, and also probably with his talks during the United Nations Assembly meeting, that the youth is going to play a very important role in Egypt's future.
Do you believe that with this plan of preparing these number of youth in order to get ready to participate in the political life, we could have more active political life in the future? Because unfortunately, as we are going to run for the upcoming parliamentary elections, we are witnessing a very weak role by the political parties, and not the required role that we are wishing to see up to this moment. So how can we activate the role of politicians, especially the young ones, to participate in the political life?
I think it's very important to train the young people on how politics is being done and how you can be successful in politics. I think this is what we lack. We lack the awareness of what politics are all about. I remember a couple of days ago I was going through Facebook and reading some comments. So one of my friends, he shared a status by one of his friends, and he was one of the young soon-to-be parliamentary candidates, and said that after he was so enthusiastic about joining the parliamentary elections, the next ones, he decided to quit it because
he's not going to run.
No, he's not going to run. Yeah, he's not going to run for the parliament seat because they joined the Doki district with the Aguza district. You know, so and then he said that this means that he would need millions and millions of pounds in order,
which is a very serious issue.
Of course, you need lots of money, you need lots of supporters. But this is actually the case everywhere, even in the United States when they have the president elections.
Yes, but the presidential election is different. For a young politician to run, if he's not, he does not belong to a political party, he is a single candidate.
Yes.
It would be very competitive to go and spend money, and it's
of
quite
course.
challenging.
It's very difficult, of course, because not everyone has
Indeed.
4, 5, 6, or 10 million pounds just to spend for his campaign. But what is very important is you need to be convincing to the people, which means you make small appearances, you make small
and you can use the social media as well, which is very convenient.
Of course, you need social media. You need to express your opinion and your way of thinking, and the way you will be acting as a parliament representative. And you need to convince people. And when you convince the normal people who will go vote for you, you might also convince possible persons or companies who would be interested in supporting your campaign because they will benefit from your way of thinking, for example. So I think donations is something extremely important, and I don't think that, for example, most of the young candidates, the election candidates, are really aware of this point. And this is something, of course, which you need to gain by experience. And we're still at the very beginning, but this does not mean that they should not continue learning. I mean, you should and maybe travel, go to Europe, see how the candidates do their campaigns there, get in touch with the European Union. I'm sure they have lots of projects to fund such young politicians.
Also, the President called for developed countries to help support less privileged countries in achieving sustainable development. So how can this be achieved?
Well, this is very important, because if the developed countries will not support the developing countries, then we are really in a big dilemma. And of course, most of the countries of the third world, or most of the developing countries now, they have suffered a lot from colonialism and from poverty and of course from misleading and corrupt politicians who work for the benefit of big multinational oil companies, for example. I mean, if you look into Nigeria and many of the other oil countries in Africa, for example, you find them very poor countries, and you find 1 or 2 or 3 big multinational oil companies making big money there. So I think it's very important that the first world, how they call it, or the developed countries, really start pushing and supporting the developing countries, not just by lending them money for loans or funds or something. No, they should give them the know-how actually, and start to build up the economy there by supporting them with multinational companies, with factories, for example. If you look, most of the fabrics, the T-shirts, the clothing sold in Germany or in Europe, they come from very poor countries like Vietnam, very poor areas in China, for example, or from Sri Lanka. And I think, and if you read about how what kind of money they pay for the workers, this is a joke. I mean, some of them, they get like 90 cents for a whole day, and they are making a T-shirt which is sold in Europe for 100 euros or something, you know. So this is something which I totally disagree with, and I think it's only fair that these countries and these companies help the other developing countries in really raising up their economy and the living standards of the people living there.
But with what you have just mentioned, Mr. Sheta, that it's not a kind of help. It's more like they are exploiting the laborers in these countries in order to benefit. So how can we regulate that?
Unfortunately, yes, they exploit them very much, and it is. You could also see that in some companies in Egypt, for example, some companies which are producing or assembling foreign products, they are sold here in Egypt twice as expensive as they're sold, for example, in Germany or France. So, and of course, who pays the bill? The Egyptian consumer pays the bill. For example, there are some cars sold here for 1 million Egyptian pounds, for example, which in Europe only cost like 500,000 Egyptian pounds, you know, in euros, if you transfer it to euros. So this means the Egyptian consumer, he pays twice the price.
Which is always the case, especially in the field of the car.
Of course,
the car, the automobile.
This is something which actually President Sisi really needs to have a very close look at, because I think the Egyptian government supported this sector over the past 30 years
of car industry?
Sorry?
Of the automotive industry.
Exactly. They gave them lots of benefits and tax reductions and everything. And I think this was not for the benefit of, neither for the benefit of the Egyptian economy, nor for the benefit of the Egyptian consumer as well. So what we have in Egypt now are very high, actually the highest, one of the highest road crash rates worldwide. We have one of the highest road fatality rates worldwide. This is because of the most of the cars which are assembled in Egypt or imported to Egypt are of extremely low quality, and they lack the least of active and passive safety features like ESP, for example, which became mandatory in all the cars assembled and sold in Europe starting from 2013. So we need to have a very closer look if we want to reduce the numbers of deaths in Egypt, if you want to reduce the air pollution in Egypt. I'm sure you heard about the $18 billion fine which the German company Volkswagen is supposed to pay in the United States. And this is because they manipulated a device, the control unit of the engine, for reducing the emissions of the car when it's being on the dynamometer in the test, being tested by the government or by the Environmental Protection Agency, for example. So we need to have, also in Egypt, we need to have standards and specifications. For example, the air we have in Egypt is one of the most polluted you can breathe anywhere in the world. And this is because we have no regulations. You can get a car with the technology of the 80s and the 70s, and it would just be allowed to drive on the road and pollute the air.
And you can see it with your bare eyes.
Of course.
Many of the cars and the buses are emitting the black smoke all over the place.
Exactly. Because the engines are very old technology. They don't have catalytic converters to clean the exhaust fumes. They lack the latest technology in reaching, for example, the Euro 5 or the Euro 6 emission levels, which is standard in Europe right now. So just imagine we had some of these emission standards in Egypt. This means you could first of all, you can get lots of money. You would save lots of money for treating cancer problems and health problems, and you could also get lots of money from the car companies if they violate these emissions, like it happened in the United States. So this is you can save billions of pounds for treating the health complications caused by these deadly emissions.
Okay, Mr. Mohamed Sheta, media expert, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, we go for a short break and we'll resume the breakfast show, so stay tuned.